Great. Well, welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is really kind of community action basics. What do we need to know in the Community Action Network that kind of grounds us in our history, gives us our kind of point of reference and point of contact. We know that we have a lot of new folks who come in to community action over time. And the partnership, based on membership feedback, will be doing this kind of webinar twice a year. So you can have new staff, new board members, folks who want a refresher, maybe a refresher right before your CCAP exam, on some of the core elements of the history and foundational elements of community action. So thank you for being with us here today. We are recording today's webinar. It will be posted up on our website. You also have the ability to post questions in the Q&A window or the chat window on the right-hand side of your window. Everyone is muted today just because we have so many people on the webinar, we're not able to unmute, but please put your questions in the chat window or the Q&A window, and we will pause periodically to make sure we answer your questions, or at least get your questions so I can go find the answers later and bring them back to you. So again, my name is Denise Harlow. I'm the CEO of the National Community Action Partnership, your national membership association. Our mission is to ensure the causes and conditions of poverty are addressed and to support and strengthen and provide as many resources as we can to the Community Action Network as a whole. And we'll talk a little bit about the partnership and the other national partners that help support the Community Action Network as we go through here today. So let's go to the next slide. So the promise of community action. Every community action agency across this country has probably a different name. Many of you have different logos. Many of you may even call yourself something different than such and such community action agency or community action partnership or community action program. Many of you do use community action in your name, but many of you also don't. But what binds us all together is this promise. And many organizations start board meetings, they'll start staff meetings, they'll be posted on their wall. This promise is what binds us all together. And it reads, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. That we care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. There's a lot in this promise statement that talks about who community action is. And when we talk about and promote the work of community action, or we're responding to something from a community action perspective, we will oftentimes tie us back to the promise, especially the piece about community action embodies that spirit of hope. We can talk about services and strategies and outputs and outcomes all day long, but that embodies the spirit of hope is oftentimes what people remember us for when they came to us for assistance, that we gave them, that we trusted them, that we talked to them as people, and that we gave them or helped them build that spirit of hope. The other element in the promise statement is that we care about the entire community. And we use that statement quite frequently when we're talking about challenges that our country is facing, that we care about every aspect of our community. Every family person in this country is important to community action. I hope that you will think about this promise. I hope that maybe you'll post it above your desk. I hope you see it in your conference room or in your agency. We put it on our board agendas and our staff meeting agendas here at the partnership. I hope that you learn and embrace this promise of community action. So, you are part of a national network. I started in community action about 25 years ago as a social worker in a group home program at Schenectady Community Action Program. I was like, do you think actually the quintessential anti-poverty organization would hire me, Denise? I was so excited to get the job at SCAP. Your organization is one of 1,000 local agencies just like SCAP all over this country, in every corner of America. We also have about 44 state associations. I used to work at the New York State Catholic Community Action Association, NISCA, and so your state association provides a wealth of training and tools and resources for you as well. And then we have our state CSBG offices, and we'll talk a little bit about state CSBG offices because the Community Services Block Grant, CSBG, is what gives community action agencies its designation now as a CAP agency. That's changed over time, but since the early 80s, CSBG is that leverage point. And because it's a block grant, it flows through state offices. And so I'll use that term state CSBG office frequently, and they are a key partner in our fight against poverty. And you'll see here that last year our network touched the lives of more than 15 million people across this country in red states, blue states, purple states. And we'll talk about the board structure of community action, but we connect the entire country together to fight and end the causes and conditions of poverty. Next slide. And today's webinar really isn't focused so much on all the different trends in poverty. We probably need to host those kind of webinars routinely as well. We talk about them a lot in the field. Poverty today looks different than it did 15, 20 years ago. We know the face of poverty continually changes. We know that the stickiness, if you're born poor, the likelihood that you stay poor is greater today than it ever has been. And the likelihood if you were born in a wealthier household, the likelihood that you will stay at that richer end of the spectrum is greater than it used to be. We have deeper and deeper racial inequality when it comes to both income and wealth. We know that we're facing an opioid crisis. We also know opioids and drug addiction is not new in our country. We know that community action has been responsive in a lot of different ways over the years in that space. We also are facing the aging of America and the growing number of seniors and what we see on the horizon coming down the pike if our country doesn't respond differently to the aging of America and the retirement crisis that we're in and soon to be facing. There's going to be a deeper need and deeper experience of poverty for our seniors in this country. So in community action, it's your job to pay attention to the trends on poverty, the trends on opportunity, economic trends. I hope many of you are kind of wonky like me a little bit. You want to read those policy pieces. You've kind of read the newspaper over the course of your life, although now newspapers are web-based certainly. But paying attention to current affairs is a critical element of leadership development in community action. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and let's see, is there any questions up on the board so far? I see there's a couple, so I'm going to ask, Charity's off to the side here. She's going to be checking into some of those questions. So let's start here with a quote about Sergeant Schreiber. Sergeant Schreiber is kind of the grandfather to community action. Sergeant Schreiber was the first director of the Office of Economic Opportunity. He was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson. And you'll hear a lot about Sergeant Schreiber as we go forward here. And I love this quote from him. What can change the world today is the same thing that has changed it in the past. An idea and the service of dedicated individuals to that idea. That quote stands today. And everyone on today's webinar, your partners, your colleagues at your organizations, your board, your volunteers, your staff, are the embodiment of this quote. You are that dedicated and committed individuals to this idea. So today we're going to go through a number of elements. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about a variety of pieces over the course of history. We sometimes we land on that 1960s, and we'll talk a bit about the 1960s, and they're an important foundational element to our network. But we've made changes and shifted and had to be nimble as a network in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the aughts, in the 10s, and in the 20s coming up. We continually bend and are nimble with the changes in in today's environment. So let's talk about some of the points in time that are important to some of the history that we have in community action. So before I kind of go down that road, we're going to touch here to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about some of the infrastructure organizations that I will make mention of as we go down this timeline. First is the partnership. We used to be called NACA back in the day, the National Association of Community Action Agencies. We are now the Community Action Partnership. I believe that transition happened in 2000, 2001. We have a couple of conferences. We do webinars. We do training and toolkits, all sorts of different things. You have CAP Law, which are our attorneys. how fantastic of a network that we have attorneys that we can actually call, contact, reach out to, who understand CSBG, they understand the complexities of Head Start, they understand how all these pieces fit together from a governance and finance perspective. They're based in Boston, and their conference is coming up next week in Charlotte. I can't wait to be there. It's one of the best conferences over the course of the year. We have EndCAP, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, David Bradley. That's a critical, key partner in our work, and I hope that you will go to endcap.org and learn more about them, and I'm going to touch more on David and his work here in a moment. And NASCAP. That is, I think, how you say it. That's how I say it. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's the National Association for State Community Services Programs. This is the national association that represents the state offices, both on CSBG and weatherization. Janae Bieland is the executive director of NASCAP, and again is one of our closest partners in training and technical assistance. And they also advocate on behalf of CSBG and weatherization. Next slide. But let's talk for a moment about EndCAP. If you're not familiar with EndCAP, I hope you immediately after this webinar go to endcap.org and learn more about David Bradley and his work. I also hope that you have the chance to take his 1 or 2 day course on the history of the war on poverty. Today's just kind of an hour-long sprinkling of some of the history. David's session is amazing. It's got music, it's got video, and he has the personal stories. He worked for Shriver. He is our lobbyist on the Hill. He is our advocate on the Hill for community action. He talks to legislators about CSBG and weatherization, as well as community action writ large, and all the great work that you do every day. He asks you sometimes for data and for stories that when he's dealing with a particular House member or senator that he wants to hear directly from you. He also has a conference every March that I hope if you haven't been to, I hope that you get the chance to go to. It's an amazing experience to hear elected officials talk and support community action. You also have the chance to go on the Hill with your teams and knock on doors and talk about CSBG and the great work that you do every day. Right now, he has a CSBG reauthorization bill, and I know there's a ton of information up on his website. I hope that you're doing your work in the field around HR 1695 and helping to get your congressional representatives to support CSBG reauthorization. So community action, are we different? People ask me that. We are. We are set in statute to be the anti-poverty network across America. Our boards look different. Our blending and braiding of funding looks different. We appreciate the great work of all of our sister networks, right? We have the Salvation Army. We have NeighborWorks, which does a lot of work in housing. We have the Red Cross, certainly, and Catholic Charities and Lutheran Social Services, Jewish Family Services, and other multi-service standalone nonprofits all across this country, all doing fantastic work. We believe that community action is different because it's different in every locality. You do needs assessments to assess local needs. You develop work plans around those needs. Your boards are what we call tripartite. A third of your boards are democratically selected from low-income communities. It's about maximum feasible participation. And that's the key word, maximum, well, 3 words, maximum feasible participation. That folks living with low incomes have a right to determine for themselves what success looks like. And if monies are coming into the community to fight and end poverty, folks living with low incomes have a right and are the best people to understand what needs to be done in a community. So we are different. So again, this statement here, we are different, we have a unique history, and we serve 99% of America's counties. And people say, Denise, how come people don't know community action? And I understand that's a challenge. I'm doing this work a long time, and I am frustrated and challenged by that as well, and we're doing what we can to get the word out. We'll talk a little bit about our impact report that we released earlier this year to try to frame up that story. But we are the national network that has been designated in statute to fight and end poverty. Regardless of what kind of blending of services and products that you provide, you are a CAP agency. Our funding, CSBG, Community Services Block Grant, again, that's what gives us our local designation, and we'll talk a little bit about how that developed up over time. But CSBG, that money is meant to be flexible at the local level. Unlike other block grants, like child care block grants and such, they're very determined. TANF and other things, CDBG sometimes is a bit flexible as well, but CSBG is meant to be locally driven. You're accountable. We'll talk a little bit later about org standards, but you get audited. You have to go through OMB requirements around your audit. Your accountability as a CAP agency is going to look a lot different than other nonprofits in your community because you have federal money. There are certain other requirements because you're a CAP agency, which makes you more accountable than other nonprofits and other governmental and other nonprofits in your local community. We talked a little bit about tripartite. I mentioned the 1/3 are democratically selected from low-income communities. 1/3 are also from the elected officials, because every part of our community needs to be fighting to end poverty. Elected officials are already selected by the community, which adds a deeper level of community engagement in our governance structure. And 1/3 of our boards are from the private sector, like other nonprofits. And I will also say that about 75% of our network are nonprofit private community action agencies, like SCAP. When I worked in Schenectady, we were a 501c3 nonprofit, like many of you. But many of you, about 20–25% of our network are what we call public CAPs. They come from local units of government. When I was in New York, we had about 52 CAPs at that point in time. 2 of them were public. Livingston County, upstate New York, very rural, and New York City. So public or private, there's a long history there in your own local community about why you're either a public or a private. But under that tripartite structure, both organizations have that requirement. If you're a public entity, you have an administrating or an advisory board that is also tripartite. The last thing here, we mentioned briefly the needs assessments. Under statute and in the org standards, every 3 years, some states it's every 2 years, and in some states you have to do annual updates. You need to do a needs assessment. That's because CAP agencies are required to understand what's going on in your community around poverty. But it's also not just about the needs, but it's also about the resources. Because you're not going to duplicate programs if there's 3 other agencies doing those programs. Your job is to try to fill in and mobilize the entire community to fight poverty. All right, so historically, our country has a mixed history when it comes to fighting poverty, and we don't want to discount certainly the great work that our faith-based partners do every day and have done historically. And you see here that over the years, over the centuries, our country has taken different tacks to work on poverty and to help struggling families. The settlement house movement, we still see settlement houses in New York, and I know New York, some of the settlement houses in New York are sub-grantees of the public CAP in New York City, which is very appropriate from my perspective. As a social worker, I know that the history around Hull House and Jane Addams' work to first kind of formalize that provision of services to families. We have the early days of aids to widows. We have after the Depression and World War II, we saw much more of a formalized response to try to help families. We saw the New Deal, the development of Social Security, and the aid to dependent children. And then certainly the GI Bill, mortgage insurance programs coming out after that. But I will say that some of these programs, for instance, were not always equitably addressed. And we talk about the need to focus on equity when we talk at the Community Action Partnership, and we see equity embedded in our mission, in our vision, in our value statements. And we know historically when we look at that history and governmental programs that excluded people of color from participation, we know there's a long history that we have to make sure that Community Action continually addresses to make sure that our work is grounded in equity. And again, historically here we have the Ford Foundation as the early days. I want to say that's late 50s, I want to say. I may have my numbers wrong, or maybe early 60s. I'm pretty sure it's late 50s. Invested in the Gray Areas Project, where we're kind of the initial stages of the maximum feasible participation model that Community Action embraces today. And then Michael Harrington's book, The Other America. If you're a geek on history, I'd find a copy. It's not that big. It's interesting to read a book written at that period of time in terms of some of the language, that's used, but it really talked about the other America, and it really caused a stir. And it talked about poverty, but you even hear the word other in that title, because when we talk today about not othering people, and we're going to have John Powell be the keynoter at our conference in August this year in Chicago, and he's spoken with us before about that underlying aspect of our culture that others people, whether it's the poor, whether it's people who look different than we do, who might have disabilities, who are in a different age bracket than we are. It's easy to other. So I find it fascinating that we call it the other America, even in Harrington's book title. But you get the impression, right, that there's the level of poverty in America, the desperation for families, the deep, deep poverty across America was hidden. Some might say it's still hidden today. I probably would say that as well. We don't want to talk about it. Sometimes we use the P word, poverty. We're not scared of the P word, but I'm also able to use the word economic opportunity and self-sufficiency and be able to frame our arguments for the audiences that I talk to. Anyway, I digress. All right, so next slide. So let's move into some of those foundational elements of community action. We were grounded in 1964, and you'll see here the quote from in his State of the Union. And I have it above you, which is why my eyes are leaving the camera here for a moment. Let us carry forward the plans and programs of John F. Kennedy, not because of our sorrow or sympathy, but because they are right. The administration today, here and now, declares an unconditional war on poverty in America. Our joint federal-local efforts must pursue poverty and pursue it wherever it exists. And you can get this on YouTube. You can hear him say it. And so that's what I hear in my head, the unconditional war on poverty. And in 1964, we are going to be commemorating this in August, is the 55th anniversary of the signing of the Economic Opportunity Act. This is a poster that actually hangs outside in our hallway as well. We oftentimes joke here that we want to do a reenactment, but we have a lot of women here at the partnership, and we all want to be the woman holding the white purse. And there's only so many women in the picture. There's also only so many people of color in the picture. There are some, but it's interesting, again, a good snapshot of history of where we came from. Now, in the Economic Opportunity Act, this is also some of the key language that we have in our historical back pocket. The United States can only achieve its full economic and social potential as a nation only if every individual has the opportunity to contribute to the full extent of his or her capabilities and to participate in the workings of our society. It is therefore the policy of the United States to eliminate, quote, the paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty. And you'll hear that phrase, the paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty. We still face that today, don't we? You hear some of the stereotypes or the impressions of people who are living in poverty, however you want to frame that. How can they have this? How can they have that? Given that most of them, 40% of America can't meet a $400 expense, many of us are not that far away from poverty. But yet we may own televisions, we may own a refrigerator, we may have air conditioning or heat in our homes. That paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty is something real that in community action we talk about. We need to deal with ourselves, with our own personal biases about that kind of stuff, and have honest conversations in our organization. But as part of the Economic Opportunity Act, in addition to community action, you'll see here a list of a variety of programs that were also included at the same time. VISTA, Charity off to my side, was a VISTA. Once a VISTA, always a VISTA, right, Charity? And we know many of you also were involved in AmeriCorps, Job Corps, Neighbor Youth Corps, Head Start, from the same soil as Head Start and community action growing together. We know about half of the network provides Head Start services. About a third of Head Start kids go through a community action Head Start program. We are like this with Head Start. We have family planning came out of the Economic Opportunity Act, foster grandparent programs, which many CAP agencies operate, RSVP, legal services, summer youth programs, all sorts of programs came out of the Economic Opportunity Act and still thrive today. Now that was in 1964, so let's start moving the needle a little bit forward. And I know some folks on today's webinar might be preparing for your CCAP exam next week. I believe it's on Wednesday, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the webinar about how you develop a career path in community action and what some of those components you want to have in your career path, and a CCAP is one of them. But as a CCAP candidate, you're going to want to know the difference between the Green and the Cui Amendments. This is the beginning of, well, let's just say in 1964, right, the monies went directly from the federal government directly to local communities. Agencies were created in the 60s in order to receive those dollars. Those organizations were community-driven, community-governed, community-staffed, driven by the community. And that direct funding maintained itself until the early 80s, until the block grant happened. But even in the 60s, you begin to see a little discomfort with power going to local communities, with local folks being able to have control over how these monies are spent. And you'll see here, these two amendments are in some ways a response to that uneasiness. The Green Amendment stipulated that officials had the authority to designate the official CAP agency in their area. Most agencies were certified, but you'll see here a few big cities took control and replaced the CAA either with a public CAP or another entity. Again, that power and control issues from the get-go were a part of all of this. We are embedded in politics. And in community action, we have to be comfortable in that political framework to understand all of those kind of power balances and how to navigate some of that. Now, the Cui Amendment begins to that structure of that tripartite board. And here you'll see it stipulates that a third of the board must be elected officials. That was in order, right? Because, again, all this money is coming to local communities. Wait a minute, we want to have a little bit more control over these resources. Now, it's always good to see that the maximum feasible participation of the poor, if you want to frame it that way, certainly, still remained at one-third of the membership. And I will say in today's statute, this gets a little technical, it actually says at least one-third of your board must be democratically selected from low-income communities. Your board could be larger than one-third from the low-income community, but we can talk about that nuance a little bit later. All right. So moving forward, 1969, I love this graphic of all the different pictures of some of the old logos from Community Action, Head Start, and other programs. President Nixon appointed Donald Rumsfeld, and those of you who've been around a while, that is the same Donald Rumsfeld. If you have seen the movie Vice, for instance, you will see some of these same characters, right? Even the Economic Opportunity Act is mentioned in that movie. You'll have Donald Rumsfeld. He appoints Dick Cheney. He has Dick Cheney as part of his team. Christy Todd Whitman. Names from the 90s and the aughts that have been engaged a lot in policy work are part of our history. And I like to show this next quote because it was written as part of one of Donald Rumsfeld's memos. And for me, it's one of the most powerful statements about community action. That we have a catalytic mission. I love that word catalytic. I can't always spell it, can't always say it, but I know what it means. It's kind of like that flywheel concept if you're thinking about the good to great model, right? If you can spin what you're doing well, you can spin off things, you can make change happen. If you have a catalytic mission, once you start moving, you keep moving. And then we make the entire community more responsive. And it goes down here to even say that effectiveness, therefore, is not measured by the services we provide. It's not measured by the butts and seats, as we say in Head Start, right? It's about the improvements and changes we make in a community. It's about outcomes. And it's been about outcomes since the very beginning. We have a lot of folks wanting to talk about outcomes versus outputs. You know what? We've been focused on outcomes from day one. We're going to talk about the development of Roma in the early 90s. Focus on outcomes then. We've been doing logic models and outcome work for a long time. Is it hard? It is very hard to demonstrate outcomes sometimes. But we've been doing it and we've been talking about it for a long time. Next slide. All right, so this picture hangs in our hallway. This is a picture of Charlie Braithwaite. Charlie, I was able to meet him several times over the years. There's a video of him up on the web. I believe it's up on our website. If you can't find it, let us know. We can send it to you. He'll talk to you about some of the history of community action and how you are true warriors in the fight on poverty. In the early 70s, President Nixon did attempt to shut down community action. Memos had gone out the door to local agencies saying, we're ending the Office of Economic Opportunity. You're going to need to shut down, pack up, and be done with your work. Charlie and a few other folks sued the presidential administration to stop that from happening, and was successful. So at times over our history, we've had to push back and fight back. We had to speak truth to power. And Charlie's one of those historical figures that if you can watch his video, I encourage you to do so. It is amazing to hear a voice from history talk directly to us. So again, still at this point in time, if we talk about the mid-70s, we were still directly funded federal to federal to local, excuse me. So, sorry, I just saw something came in. So someone is having a little trouble on audio, but hopefully most folks can still hear me okay. Given the number of people we have on, hopefully things are going okay. You may want to try dialing back in and reconnecting with your audio broadcast. Of course, you couldn't hear me say that because you can't hear me. So in 1974, certainly that we shifted away from a direct seat at the table from the Office of Economic Opportunity, and it shifted to the Community Services Administration. This was the beginning of a step where we had to save community action, but it lost its seat at the table. When it used to be a cabinet position under the Office of Economic Opportunity, you were sitting at that main table of decision makers. Here in the mid-70s, you'll see it begins to move down the food chain a little bit, and it went in with the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and became the Community Services Administration. The money still went from the feds to the local, but it started to go into one of the departments. Let's go to the next slide. So throughout the 70s, the monies went directly from the feds to the locals. But during the Reagan administration, some of you may remember, there was a big push to go to federalize the government, to make sure that power was given to the states. There was pressure to dismantle funding that was going directly to local agencies. And at that time, CSBG, at the time the CSA, was on the block for elimination. David Bradley and others were instrumental in making sure that did not happen. David would be happy, I'm sure, to share the story with you about how he wrote, I believe, the first community services block grant legislation. I want to say it happened in 48 to 72 hours. It was a lot of work very, very quickly. But what it did, it was able to carve out the CSA money into the community services block grant. It didn't get blended with SSBG. It didn't get blended into another block grant. It had its own standalone block grant, the Community Services Block Grant, CSBG. And that monies go through states, so you have your state CSBG office, which adds a layer of complexity. It adds a layer of accountability, certainly. It also adds a layer of bureaucracy at times. I think all parties would probably agree with that. But it does add a bit more accountability in terms of closer to on the ground to do that oversight. So all states administer the block grant. By 1983, all states had assumed that responsibilities. There were still restrictions here on political activities and voter registration, which we'll talk a little bit about as well as we go forward. So you'll see here that state offices were now installed as recipients of CSBG. Under mandate, 90% of the money that went to the states needed to, and still today goes out to local agencies. 90% the states need to pass through directly to local agencies. And if you received the money at that point in time, if you were the CAP agency in that point in time, unless there was another thing that happened that caused your agency to go into distress, or there were significant concerns that, and we can talk a bit more about that at some point, about being de-designated as a CAP agency, you have that money today. It's in some ways entitlement money. And I think that's incredibly important. School systems don't change their funding periodically. It's invested in the local community, that school system is there to serve the needs of the community. Same thing with CSBG and Community Action. There's a federally identified anti-poverty organization to make sure families get served and to make sure resources are working to make sure families get the help they need. So again, you see here in the third bullet that eligible agencies at that point in time became CAP agencies. They were kind of grandfathered or grandmothered in. And again, states have a responsibility for monitoring. And is that a challenge? Yes, it is. 50 different states, well, once you add in the territories, 52, 53 different state offices, people coming in, right? It gets to be a challenge. But 5% of the money is meant to go to the states for administrative purposes, and in most states, 5% then is also used for discretionary purposes. Sometimes those monies go to state associations, and sometimes that 5% go to other organizations or other special projects. It really depends on each individual state. But that really started in the early days of CSBG in the early 80s. Now, like other federal grants, other federal projects, other federal block grants, CSBG must be reauthorized. I say must, but it's supposed to be authorized every 5 years. It was reauthorized in 84, 86, 90, 94, 98. Now, I was just a math minor in college, but I know that 2019 to 1998 is a bit more than 5 years. And there have been attempts over the years, EndCAP has had bills and legislation to reauthorize CSBG, but like many other programs, it has not yet been reauthorized. But there is a new bill on the table today, HR 1695, that David is working with agencies to get support for from your congressional representatives. It's a strong bill. We're hopeful that it's one of those bills that hopefully can get bipartisan support and has bipartisan support to move forward. I like on this slide that we included some of the old logos. The pinwheel, some of your agencies may still use the pinwheel. I know many agencies still do. My first SCAP business card has the pinwheel on it. You'll have there the 50th anniversary logo that we developed. We have the Huggy Hearts that agencies use, and the partnership logo that we hope that you find a way to include this on your website or on your materials or as part of your own logo going forward. So 1994 is another moment in time. So again, remember we talked about the 60s, the development, the early 70s where we were under threat, the early 80s where we became a block grant. Here in the early 90s, there was GPRA, the Government Performance and Reinvestment Act. GPRA talked about making sure that government worked better. And as part of that, the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force, MATF, was created by the Office of Community Services to look at results, to make sure that community action was focused on results. It included CAP directors, state offices, association. I recently saw a list of the folks who are on the MATF, and some of those names are still floating around today. So it was really from the grassroots up. And it really produced those first 6 national goals that we know as the foundation elements of ROMA. And ROMA was created at that point in time, results-oriented management and accountability. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. And I know some of that I'm glossing over a little bit, and I know there was a lot of work as part of the MATF, and there's more information about that, but we want to touch on a lot of different parts of history here today. So in 2000, the network, including the partnership, went under a rebranding initiative. We went from the pinwheel to the Huggy Heart and the Community Action logo kind of brand. Now, I will say that at that point in time, there was an encouragement for agencies to embrace some of the national branding. Some folks didn't like the Huggy Heart, still don't like the Huggy Heart. We have the logo available without the Huggy Heart. I kind of like the Huggy Heart. We use it in a lot of different ways. There was no mandate for agencies to change names. There never has been. You're all local, independently determined organizations. Now, the rollout of that, I will say, in 2000, 2001, for those of us who remember, 9/11 happened. And in our country, many things stopped at that point in time. I will also say that ROMA was supposed to be mandated by 2001 and rolled fully out. But again, 9/11 really kind of slowed a lot of the parts of our country. We had to recover as a country. Things were reprioritized in a lot of different ways. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily a reason for, but where we were as a country, things got a little bit stalled out during those kind of points in time. But you'll see here in 01, I am 49. Information memoranda is the way that OCS speaks to the network, IMs. They also talk to us via Dear Colleague letters. Dear Colleague letters tend to be a bit more informal. IMs are more formal. Now, IMs still do not have the force of law. They are not statutes. They are guidance. And sometimes there are occasional IMs that are important for CAP agency folks to know. IM 49 is one of them. Kind of those foundational pieces about clarifying the role of Roma, about focused on outcomes, and it's there to help us tell our story. We're going to talk about how we've refreshed Roma since then. But IM 49 is an important one. I'll just say IM 82 is another good one. It talks about the tripartite board. IM 138 talks about some of the TA, technical assistance structure with state associations and RPICs and centers for excellence, and there are others. And we can certainly send folks a link to those IMs if you are unable to find them. So moving through the history, in 2004, there was an assessment, the program assessment and rating tool, in response to a concern from GAO that there was, what's the discernible outcome of community action in CSBG? In this point in time, the network pushed back again, right? Roma, tell our story. How are we framing up what we're doing? So in 2005, the national performance indicators were rolled out. You want us to identify specific outcomes? We can do that. We have outcomes. You want us to put them in your boxes? We can certainly do that. So the NPIs were first developed, National Performance Indicators. I think most folks agreed those first round of NPIs didn't capture everything that we do, nor do the current ones. It's impossible, I think, to develop a core set of NPIs that capture everything. That's why even today we have other, so we can capture our other indicators in different ways. 2007 saw the Great Recession. And community action saw that recession happen before Wall Street, before the news media. I remember looking back and seeing that we were doing, trying to help families maintain their mortgages before the mortgage crash hit the news media. We were on the cusp of that because kind of the canary in the coal mine concept. But the Great Recession had a deep impact. We saw the growth of people who had lost home ownership. We saw millions of people be laid off from their job, people who had experienced poverty for the first time. And our country needed to step up. So in 2009, we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA, as some of us call it. And that was a significant investment to stabilize our country and to move it forward. Some would say it wasn't a big enough investment, but in terms of community action, right now we get, about $700 million, $710 million in CSBG. In addition, ARRA put in $1 billion of CSBG into the network. What's weatherization? 260 million, give or take? $5 billion of weatherization came into the network. Those resources had to be spent. We had to ramp up and ramp back down in 18 months and not go out of business while doing so. That was a huge ramp up and a huge ramp back down, and the network succeeded. Both CSBG and weatherization scored very, very high in terms of the number of jobs that were created or supported over that period of time. And community action was pretty successful during those ARRA years. However, when we get to 2011, President Obama, we've been struggled, I think, through many presidents. CSBG is a program that allows local control. When you're the president, you want to control those federal budget dollars. When it's local control, you don't necessarily have that kind of control. Congress loves community action, right, in CSBG because they represent local communities. But in 2011, President Obama's State of the Union talked about the recession and talked about the challenges of the budget and said we all have to cut programs we deeply care about. And he said, like community action. And some people, I remember, said, oh, that he just means that generically to other nonprofits. He's just meaning that for big picture. Every word in the State of the Union means something, and that meant community action. It was one of the most worst days of my professional life, going into coalition meetings the next day and people saying, did he really say that? He really did. In his budget that year, he proposed that CSBG be cut in half, and that rest 50% be put out to competition, be put out to bid. So if you think about Nixon or you think about Reagan, you also have to sometimes think about President Obama and his administration and the attack on the network. But you know what community action did in 2011? Just like it has in years past, it stepped up and it fought back, and it fought back effectively. By that State of the Union was in January, give or take. By April, I attended a meeting here in D.C. I was still at the New York CAP Association at that point in time. The partnership and the other national partners had convened a national group to respond to the President's State of the Union, saying, no, we are accountable, we are efficient, we are effective. And over the next couple of years, between all the work of the national partners, the local agencies, state offices, and state associations, there was a call to develop, all right, let's put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to develop a set of organizational standards for our network. We're going to develop some state accountability measures for our state partners. We're going to develop accountability measures for our federal partners. And we're going to modernize ROMA, the Results-Oriented Management and Accountability System. And we did exactly that. So under ROMA Next Generation, we developed a theory of change, which we'll talk about here in a moment. We had a renewal of our call to action to work toward outcomes. And I will just say for a moment, I don't think I have the ROMA cycle in here. I probably should have put it in here. But ROMA isn't about NPIs. ROMA isn't about reporting. ROMA stands for, again, results orientation. It starts exactly with our needs assessment. It goes into our planning, whether it's agency planning or community planning. It goes into deployment of products and services and strategies that have an impact. It means we certainly collect our data through NPIs and other data systems. I know many of you have many data systems. And then we pause and analyze that data to figure out what needs to be different next year or the next program cycle to make sure we're more effective. We analyze the data we receive. And that's what ROMA Next Gen kind of did for us. It kind of really pushed us to think about the integration of our planning, our assessment, our planning, our deployment, our data collection, and our analysis throughout our organization. It called on our boards to be more engaged, more intentionally engaged. It talked about reporting and talking as an organization and reporting out the great work that our organizations are already doing. It focused on a new annual report, which we can talk a little bit about, but we have a modernized reporting system, and again, we have that integration of all the ROMA cycle pieces. So let's show you the National Theory of Change. This was developed, again, by the network, put out by OCS. You'll see here that foundational element, that's marble, that we have a national network of 1,000 local agencies, state offices, state associations, national partners, OCS, stable infrastructure. And if you talk about the Frameworks Institute, where they talk about reframing what language you use, that foundation, that construction narrative, is what they say resonates with the general public. So we have a strong foundation of agencies in this country. You'll see here, building on that foundation, we believe certain things. We have core principles in community action. We believe that poverty is incredibly complex. There's no one size fits all. What works for my family is going to be different than works for your family. My challenges are going to be different than your challenges. We have to work with the whole family and that family uniquely. We believe in systems change. It's not just about what the family needs to do different, right? It's about how systems need to change to make the foundation that all families are working from more equitable. We need to maximize the involvement of people living with low incomes. We need to leverage all resources. On the management performance side of the equation, you'll see some more of those ROMA concepts about how well do we operate. I'll give you accountability. I'll give you the standards, both at the local agency, the state, the feds, and I'll also show you what kind of outcomes we achieve through our national performance indicators and our annual report. We move through, we provide a myriad of services and strategies. No two CAP agencies see the same set of services. What's the saying? You've seen one CAP agency, you've seen one CAP agency. They all look a little bit different. But we're all working toward these three national goals: that individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security, that communities where people with low incomes live are healthy and offer economic opportunity, and third, people with low incomes are engaged and active in building opportunities in their communities. You'll see that language is critical. People with low incomes. I trip over the language myself sometimes. It's not low-income people. People are people. Our mission is focused on people who are living currently with low and moderate incomes, because we also know the poverty line is artificially low. CSBG can be used typically for families up to 125% of poverty. Just because you make 126% of the federal poverty line doesn't mean that you are not struggling in America. We estimate it takes 200 to 250% of poverty in most parts of our country to be somewhat self-sufficient. This is not something that has to be used by every agency, but it is something I hope that you are familiar with as a community action leader in your community. So those organizational standards give us a sense of accountability. This allows all 1,000 agencies, public and private, to be held accountable to the same 58 standards if you're a nonprofit private cap, or 50 standards if you're a public cap. They are identified under maximum feasible participation, under leadership or vision and direction, and operations and accountability. And then there are standards within each of these sections that agencies every year have to be held accountable to. And the target is that all agencies meet 100% of these organizational standards. But we also know 100% of everybody doesn't mean 100% of anything 100% of the time, because we are human beings working in a human system. But this system of organizational standards helps build trust. We know, I believe it's something like 92% of the agencies right now meet more than 70% of the standards. Thank you, Community Action, for helping us move that needle in that direction. We need to get more above that line. We want to get all agencies meeting 90% or above, if at all possible, on those organizational standards, but that takes time. They've been mandated, I want to say, only for 3 years. They've only been through 2 levels of assessment so far. The third assessment has happened. We can't wait to see what that data looks like. But they help build trust, and they help work together to really characterize, do not guarantee a healthy or a strong organization that will exist in perpetuity, but it gives that foundational element that those are the core elements of a strong organization, both private and public. So that gets us through 19. So where are we today? We are not a stagnant network. We are not just talking about the 60s. We have been talking about a nimble movement every point in time. 1994, they want to talk about government responsibility. We respond. We talk in 01 about wanting to make sure that we are more responsive to our communities. We talk and mandate some of our outcomes and national performance indicators during the aughts. You want to say that our outcomes are a bit fuzzy because we don't just put butts in seats? We're working to move families out of poverty. We can reframe that. We can modernize our system. And today we modernize the way we talk about our network. This is our Community Action Impact Report. I hope that you've seen it. It's downloadable up on our website. If you're a member agency, you can access the InDesign files and use these models in your own local community. All of the elements are available to everyone, though, in terms of in PDFs and other ways that you can use the elements in this report. We have a one-pager front and back that kind of summarizes that impact report. You can see here, despite America's economic recovery, millions of people are still living in poverty. Even more are just one missed paycheck away from hardship. Whether our neighbors are experiencing a temporary setback or have been priced out of affordable housing, too many struggle to achieve a good quality of life. We talk about our need in our communities, our reach as a network. Last year we served 15 million people. You know how many people you reach in your own local community. And our impact. That community action truly connects individuals and families to approaches that help them succeed by their definition what success is, including high-quality education programs, job training, affordable housing, utility systems for seniors, and much, much more. We promote community-wide solutions. We're about community-level change, and that's another element of that whole Roma Next Generation piece. There's an oomph, technical term, oomph, toward community-level work and community-level change. We're doing community-level change. I see agencies running their own housing developments. I see agencies running transportation systems in local communities. Some of the largest public transportation geographic coverage areas, you know who runs those bus transport systems? Community Action. You know who's running health clinics when health systems are shutting down in rural communities? Community Action. We got community-level change happening every day. And we change lives, whether it's helping people get good jobs, whether it's helping people develop assets for the long haul, or whether it's creating those community-level, system-level change efforts we make a difference. So never let anybody tell you community action is stagnant or stuck in the past. We are about today. We use every possible trick in the toolbox. We use evidence-based programming. We talk about our outcomes. And let's talk about going forward. Community action has been involved in every census since its inception in the 60s. This year is no different. We know that this year, as with every census, but this year there's a particular concern about the undercounted communities. We want to make sure every person in this country on April 1st of 2020 gets counted. And community action has a strong, important role to play. We've been funded to provide assistance to CAP agencies, state associations, state offices, to help you train staff and make sure staff are ready to help the country be ready for the census. We know there's still more information coming down about the census. We have a website dedicated to the census. You saw it on the previous slide. If you can't find it, email me. We can send you the link. We want you to train your staff. We want our staff to be engaged in helping people not help them complete the census form, but encouraging families. Next November, when you got folks coming in for LIHEAP or energy assistance, when folks are enrolling their kids into Head Start programs, or they're coming to a parent teacher meeting or a policy council meeting, are you talking about the census? Community action has a role to play to make sure everyone gets counted. So where do we go next? Let's talk a little bit about next slide, please. Let's talk about where the partnership is going. Last year, the Partnerships Board approved a strategic plan that had input from the Community Action Network. Let me pause here. Is there a question that has come in?
Yes, they were asking about the toolkit for graphics for the impact report, so we can send that to them.
Yep, we can send you a link to that, and email me or Charity, C. Frankowski at communityactionpartnership.com or D. Harlow at communityactionpartnership.com, and we can email you those documents, including the PowerPoint for today and today's link to the recording. Mm-hmm. So what's exciting about our new vision statement is that it's not just a vision statement for the partnership or for the network. It's a vision for the country that I hope is grounded in what you see, the importance of your work and how your work is connected to this vision. It's the vision of the partnership as a nation that creates opportunities for all people to thrive, builds strong, resilient communities, and ensures a more equitable society. That's where we're headed. That's what we want to achieve for our country, and every day your work matters in the achievement of that vision. I'm also excited by these value statements, and please know that you can use these vision statements, value statements, mission statements in any of the work that you do. If it's helpful in grant applications, if you want to put these up on your wall, but however you want to use these, please feel free to do so. Our value statements are pretty exciting. This first one, that we believe all people should be treated with dignity and respect. We should be able to put a period right there and then. We believe that. But we also recognize that structural race, gender, and other inequities continue to exist and remain barriers that must be addressed. Number two, we believe that this nation has the capacity and moral obligation to ensure that no one is forced to endure the hardships of poverty. Children will never work themselves out of poverty. We have a moral obligation to make sure they get fed, they get housed, they get good education, that they have the opportunity to succeed, just like all children have that right. I just came from a session this morning talking about the retirement crisis in our country, and that seniors don't have the savings necessary to replace the income that they've had during their working life. Seniors will not work themselves out of poverty. They need a retirement of dignity, and we have a moral obligation in this country to do so. We can fix this problem, and we should. Sorry, I brought my soapbox with me today. Number three, we believe that with hope, adequate resources, and opportunity, everyone can reach their full potential as they define it, not as we define it for them. And we pledge ourselves to creating an environment that pursues innovation and excellence through multi-sector collaboration and partnership. You want innovation? We have it going on in this network, just hand over fist. Your agencies are probably doing something new and creative every day. You are bringing great new ideas to the table. You're trying to convince funders sometimes to try something new. CSBG is sometimes seen as that social capital that lets us develop new programs, new services. You're doing it every day. I love this quote from Bryan Stevenson. If you don't know Bryan, I hope that you will Google him and his work. The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And that's the work that you are in. That's the call to action that you've undertaken by working in community action. You're not here to run a program, although for many of us that's our job. That's our day-to-day job, making sure that we get the outputs done, we get the programs and services deployed. But you're always thinking, how do I help this family move out of poverty? How do I help end poverty in my community? The organization is focused on that, not butts and seats. It's about getting those kids ready for kindergarten. It's making sure mom and dad are better advocates and ready to advocate for their kids when they enter into school systems, that mom and dad have opportunities for job training and educational engagement to move the needle for the family. And that's what we're about. We're about justice for families. So where's community action and going forward? We see leadership development in this space as a critical element, and that we hope you will join us as you develop your career path in community action. This is an element that we're talking about the Connected Communities campaign. What can we do to make sure that we're speaking truth to power? The Gates Foundation last year, or maybe it was this year, I think it was last year, released their report on dramatic mobility from poverty. What are some of the key elements? And one of the key elements they recommend in our country is really changing the narrative on poverty. And community action can have a significant role and does it every day. That in order for families and communities to thrive, racialized attitudes, systems, and policies must be named and dismantled. Narratives which promote human value and belonging for all people must be front and center. We have to stop hating poor people. If community action can tell the accurate and true story about what it means to struggle in this country, what percentage of, was it 40% of Americans can't make a $400 obligation, let alone a $1,000 emergency, one paycheck away. Struggle is impacting so many more families today. And then we believe that we will engage in communication strategies that humanize people living in poverty, and we hope you do the same. Speak truth to power. As CAP folks, you need to be aware of what's coming on the horizon. I encourage you, I'm going to skip through some of this piece here, but we highlight this because as CAP agency folks, we want you to be paying attention to what's happening in the think tank world. This is what's happening right now in the think tank world. There's a proposal on the table about how we can cut children's poverty in half in 10 years. It's expensive, but it's doable. So don't let anybody ever tell you it's not doable. So I would encourage you to Google this. They have a great executive summary, but just wanted to put another kind of pin in the map, as it were, on your learning. So do we struggle as a network sometimes? Yes. Does your organization struggle sometimes as a network? Yes. Why? I love this chart that talks about an organizational life cycle. There are moments in agencies where all agencies struggle. Sometimes if you've had a long-term executive director who retire, that can be a moment of risk. Sometimes having a long-term person in place where they haven't cultivated or developed can be a risk of stagnation. Agencies always have to be thinking about what's next. You need to renew your organization. And that's what we've done, I'd say, over the last few years with the modernization of our performance management system and the org standards and the integration of all elements of the Roma cycle. We've done some of the administrative pieces. And we've seen so many agencies who are innovative, entrepreneurial. I see some of the great, cool stuff that agencies are doing, and I am just blown out of the water about the creativity, the leverage of private and public dollars to build grocery stores, to develop transportation systems, again, to develop housing, to fight AIDS and HIV, to do opioid epidemic engagement, to do community-level planning. Just some really cool stuff. So I just put that as a trigger or as a placeholder for you. Be thinking about your organization. So we know we have many people on today's webinar who are new to community action. You can have a career in community action. I was in and out. I started 25 years ago, but I spent 10 years at the New York Council of Nonprofits, working with CAP agencies, did needs assessment, strategic plans, all sorts of good stuff. On board training with CAP agencies. But you may not be in community action on a solid straight line through your entire career. You might be. We've had CAP folks who've been in the field for 40 plus years. It's amazing. 50 plus years, maybe even at this point in time. We have some real historical figures. Charles McCann comes to mind, Jim Masters, who've been around since the 60s, a deep, rich of history, and to still have that knowledge with us is an amazing gift. But we also know today's environment. As a Gen Xer, someone told me, Denise, Gen Xers will never be without a job. I asked them for that in writing. They did not provide that to me in writing. But we know the boomers are retiring. We know the recession paused that for a number of folks. But we have 10,000 people a day retiring. And we also have millennials and the folks coming after you, millennials, right? Pretty soon you will no longer be that person in the workplace. There's a whole new generation coming up after you. They're coming. We're going to have to find new ways to engage and make sure that you understand that we can have a career in community action, in and around. And even if you leave community action, I run into people every day. Hey, I worked for a CAP agency way back in the day. Hey, I worked for such and such. Is that still a CAP agency? Yes, it is. Because we've touched the lives of 15 million people, we have a lot of people who care about poverty working today, who 5 years from now maybe you're doing another job, but you will carry this work with you going forward. So what can you do to make sure that you're learning and growing in community action? Here are a couple pieces around the community action, what we call body of knowledge. There's a lot of great books out there, resources. Here are just a couple things to put into your toolbox. The one on the left, community action leaders, you can Google this. This was part of the University of Illinois, written in part by Delissa Moyo, who is on the board of the partnership and is a CAP director, I believe in Champaign, Illinois, and then was also at the Illinois State Association. It's a great resource, talks about leadership. It's a textbook that's actually used in leadership courses at the University of Illinois. We have the history of community action, that if you want more deep dive into some of the things we've touched on, written by Jim Masters. And the maximum feasible success, you can actually find this, I believe, on the web. And if you're a CCAP candidate, you've had to read pieces of this for your CCAP exam next week. It also dives deeply into the history. But what about today? I want you to read books about poverty today. And this is a slide that I bring with me on the road a lot. If you read $2 a day, toxic inequality, and evicted, you will have in your back pocket the critical elements of poverty today and how our country is or is not responding to the challenges of families. $2 a day talks about the fallacy of cash welfare assistance. It talks about the numbers of families who really live on less than $2 of cash in their pocket a day. Toilet paper is not covered by food stamps, right? How do we make sure families have shampoo, make sure they have feminine hygiene products, make sure that they have trash bags, making sure that they have the supplies in their household? You need cash to pay rent. You need cash to pay for transportation. The fallacy of where we stand today. Anyway, I bring my soapbox with me. So $2 a day. Evicted, you want to know the housing crisis and the eviction challenge that families are facing? Great book. And toxic inequality talks about the racial disparities when it comes to both income and also wealth. Heartland is a great book as well. Talks more about rural poverty challenges. Some of you remember J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. I think Heartland is a great hand-in-hand component to that. And then The Forgotten Americans, written by Isabel Sawhill from the Brookings Institute, talking about, it's more of a policy wonk book, looking for that middle of the road. Community action isn't too far left and isn't too far right. We need to find solutions that play to the middle. And The Forgotten Americans is a great read this summer if you want to focus on poverty and policy solutions. So career path. I hope that you have a long, rich, successful career in community action. It is a blessing to work for this wonderful, impactful network. What are the things that you can put into your toolbox to build that career path? I call them the trifecta of leadership development. First is that Roma certification. If you had to do these in order, I would start with your Roma certification, whether that means becoming a trainer or a certified implementer. That gives you a grounding in a little bit of the history, how our services are connected to the needs we identify in the community, how we tie that back to the outcomes we report, how we do data analytics, how we analyze our results to make change, and how all those pieces tie together from an agency perspective. Critically important. The next phase, I would recommend you get your CCAP, the Certified Community Action Professional. Your CCAP demonstrates that you understand 21st century learning, that you understand and can deploy and tie back to your work to those leadership principles. and that you take a test and you can demonstrate that you have knowledge about the history and leadership development, or leadership and deploy, and be able to write about leadership elements when it comes to community action. I'm just going to go to the next slide here because it talks a little bit more about each of these three elements. And then when they talk about the pathways, peer reviewer, and or peer implementer that we also are now piloting. The Pathways to Excellence program is grounded in organizational development. Not everyone can have a graduate degree in org development, but getting a Pathways peer reviewer certification is a way to ground yourself in what it means to be an excellent organization. More information about all of these things, I believe, can be found on our website, at least the Pathways and the CCAP. I'm pretty sure we have some stuff about becoming a Roma trainer as well. The next piece. All right, Denise, I can't get to the CCAP thing yet. I'm not going to be able to get to the Roma certified yet. What can I do? We have a curriculum up on our website funded by OCS that is called ELITE, Emerging Leader Institute for Training and Excellence. We have several state associations. Iowa comes to mind, as does West Virginia, who uses this curriculum, and I encourage other state associations or local agencies. You can use this curriculum to develop your own ELITE cohort. It's got pre-test and post-test. I think it's got 7 different categories. It's got videos. It's got research and homework exercises to help develop emerging leaders, whether it's around strategic planning, whether it's around finance, whether it's around program planning, data analytics. There are components in ELITE that can help you develop. And I think even if you're not doing a cohort, you as an individual, that might be something you want to take a look at for your own personal development. Other development networking opportunities. There are conferences coming out your ears sometimes, right? You got state association stuff going on, you got regional association. I hope that you take advantage of those opportunities to learn and connect and network with one another. These are some of the national opportunities. The CAP Law does their training conference next week. It's going to be in Charlotte. They do a lot of training on HR. There's some stuff on finance. There's stuff on governance. Some of the legal side of the equation. We're going to be talking about advocacy at that conference as well. It's a fantastic conference. I want to say next year is going to be in Chicago for them, so keep an eye on the CAP Law Conference. EndCAP happens in March. It's in D.C. If you can, I encourage every executive director, bring a board member, bring some of your leadership team to EndCAP if you can. If you're an up-and-comer, that's something that you want to keep on your radar screen. Sometimes they live stream out some of the presentations. Might be a good chance to capture some of what's going on with EndCAP. I encourage you to take a look. Our event this year will be in Chicago the last week. I hope that you think about coming on that Tuesday. We actually have Leadership Day as a pre-con event. We do a half day for emerging leaders and a half day for new executive directors. A great way to build on your trip to Chicago. And our conference in January this year will be in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in order to make sure that we are serving the needs of the agencies. We have 4 CAP agencies on the island of Puerto Rico, and given the impact still of the Hurricane Maria, we want to make sure that we're able to respond and work with our agencies. So we're inviting the network to join us in that effort. NASCAP also has some good conferences. I encourage you to, if NASCAP comes to your neck of the woods, I'd say go. I think OCS, when they're at those tables, talks differently to states because they're their primary customer than they talk to us as local agencies or associations. It's important to hear how that dialogue goes. Their February conference is usually grounded here in D.C. or in Arlington, Virginia, here in the D.C. area, and their September conference this year will be in Little Rock. So if you are in or and around Arkansas somewhere, I encourage you to think about going. Now, I know you say, Denise, it's June, but as folks coming in, I just want to make sure to highlight for you, May is always Community Action Month, so it's never too early to start planning for next year's Community Action Month, whether it's proclamations, whether it's events, whether it's some staff events, maybe you want to run a 5K. We know some agencies do that. There's always time to prepare. And I hope that you were engaged on social media. I know my Facebook feed was just full of CAP stuff all over the map, as was my Twitter handle. We have a calendar every year that we develop that you can get engaged with. And then we have some typical things that you can use year-round. I Heart Community Action. We have Huggy Hearts in all sorts of different colors. I love that we right now are using the Rainbow Huggy Heart for Pride Month. So never let anyone tell you that we are stagnant or you have to follow X, Y, Z. We love flexibility. We also earlier this year recorded a podcast. It is available up on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. We had a 6-part series where we interviewed a number of folks, including David Bradley, Jeannie Chaffin, Dr. Gail Christopher. We had some really fascinating conversations about advocacy, about racial equity, about community action. Download it. I hope that you will play that next time you're listening to podcasts. And I get asked, Denise, we need an app. We need something on our phone. Well, we got to figure out what that app is. We think we have it. It's just we're kind of rolling it out slow. We're in a soft launch phase. So again, don't let anyone tell you that we're stagnant or we're old school. We have the Community Action Academy. It's based on Moodle, which a lot of academic institutions use for their online adult learning. It's beginning to get fleshed out. We have a CCAP portal on Moodle. I believe that's where the exam takes place, is in Moodle. Our Learning Communities Resource Center has webinars, toolkits up on Moodle, and we're developing courses that you're going to be able to take on Moodle. And they may already be up there, but I've been on the road a lot lately and a little bit of vacation, so I don't know exactly what's up there at the moment. So email us and we can hook you up with the right person to learn more about our Moodle platform. And look here, you're going to be able to learn on the road. There'll be no excuse. You can watch webinars everywhere and anywhere right on your smartphone. Oh, here's a list of the e-courses. I actually had included a slide that are existing up on our Community Action Academy. Also, many of these webinars are up on our website that you can also find past webinars. So this is a picture of our website. It was revamped about 2 years ago and refreshed about a year ago, moved to a new platform. The search feature on our library of resources is a little bit easier now than it used to be. You can find toolkits, you can find webinars, you can find external resources, all sorts of good stuff. And just a few last things that I want to leave you with, because I've talked a lot at you. Have any other questions come in while it doesn't look like it.
No, some compliments though.
Oh, appreciate the positive support. Thank you for that.
Do you want to go back?
Yeah, let's go back one. So ask yourself, if I'm going to have a career in community action, or I'm mid-career in community action, what do I want to do to be a leader? These are some of the core elements that we believe you need to have as a leader in community action, and that you have the capacity to develop. Paying attention to public affairs, understanding those root causes of poverty in your community, being able to speak about poverty. Now, the fear of public speaking ranks right up there with death, I think, in terms of fear factor. I hope that you find ways to scare yourself. What is that? That's some of the best advice I got. Do something that scares you almost every day. And public speaking still scares me. It makes I always get a little nauseous before these things. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. Can you stand up in front of a room and talk for 5 minutes about poverty in your community? Can you talk about economic opportunity and the path that your CAP agency provides? All of us can practice that, whether it's in the comfort of our own home, in front of that bathroom mirror. It's good to talk that stuff out. Are you good at writing? Can you get better at writing? Can you write for different audiences? Can you get familiar with technology? Do you have a Twitter handle? I love Twitter. Are you out there? Are you talking? Are you practicing? And it's that sense of courage. It's hard. It's scary. It is nerve-wracking. But if not you, who is going to talk about poverty in your community? That's what community action is called to do, and that's what you're called to do because you work at a community action agency, association, state office, maybe you're on the board. You have a role to play, and I know you have it in you because I've met you, many of you, and I have yet to meet anybody who can't do it. I love this quote from Dr. King, and if you've seen me present, you've seen me use it in the past. Power without love is reckless and abusive. You can have power, but if you have no compassion for your fellow human being, it can be reckless. It can lead you down a path. But also, if you have love, but you have no power, or you don't use the power you have, you can be anemic. Community action has more power than we think we do. In every community in America, you are the designated anti-poverty organization. You are empowered to stand up, make waves, and speak truth to power. That's what your job is, and I hope that you do it. So I hope that we'll see you in Chicago It's going to be a good time. I hope we see you in San Juan. It's going to be warm. We will have a service element into the day, into that conference. We may have a way to give back as well through your participation. And finally, these are some of the contact information of some of the key staff. Probably should have added Charity to that list, as well as Jovita. Under our staff contact list, you can get everybody. You can see our Twitter handles. You got Partnership CEO is me. I've been on vacation, so I haven't been tweeting a lot lately, but I'm getting back at it. And you'll see the Partnership's Twitter feed and Facebook feed. So I hope that you get on, use hashtag Community Action Works, hashtags We Are 1,000 Strong. We are stronger together than we are by ourselves. So thank you, everyone, for being on today. Are there any other questions that have come in through the chat window?
Nope, just another compliment. Someone saying when they grow up, they want to be Denise Harlow.
That's very sweet of you to say. There's a lot of people that I want to be when I grow up as well. So all of you have this responsibility to speak truth to power. I hope you do it every day. Have a career in community action. There's nothing better. So with that, we will close today's webinar. We're going to be doing something like this, I think, every 6 months to make sure the new group who comes in always has a chance to refresh and get acclimated in the network. If you think there's something here we should have done more on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is our first time out with this webinar. We've used this slide deck a few times in the field, but I'd love to hear from you folks. Send me an email. What should we have included? What should we have talked more about? Or what should we have tossed out to save time? With that, we're going to go ahead and close. So thank you for being with us. Have a great weekend, and we hope to see you in Chicago. Take care. Bye-bye.